Hello everyone, Taevis here. I just received my gear for the upcoming winter season, and I figured it'd be a great time to go and talk about how I go about selecting which snowboard will work best for me, how I choose my sizes, my stances, my angles of my bindings, and how I prepare my board to be ready to shred. And we're going to start with my park board for the season, the Team Pro from Nitro. I'm going to be breaking down every aspect of buying and setting up a new snowboard, starting with which sizes, going into which specs you need for your individual kind of riding, and moving into more niche things like angle of your bindings, width of your stance, and just covering it all. So hopefully you can learn the information you need to improve your riding the most with your gear selection this season. The first thing you need to determine is which size of a snowboard you need. I use two things to decide this. First, the size of my feet. Second, how tall I am. I have very small feet, 8.5 US, so that means I don't need to get the wide board variant. But if your feet are 10.5 or getting bigger than that, you might want to look into getting a wide board, because with small feet, you don't need to worry about this thing called toe or heel drag, but once your feet start getting bigger on a normal size snowboard, your toes will start hanging off the front edge and the heel edge. Will cause it for when you're going and doing your carves, you have potential of digging in and hitting your boot on the snow, what is just not a fun situation. So if your feet are over 10.5, you want to consider getting a wide snowboard. The next thing I use is height. I am 6 foot now, so I'm riding a 159 to a 160 range, and I'll go all the way down to a 157. So there's quite a bit of flexibility in there. But when I was like, say, 5'8", then I rode a 153, 154 range, 5'10", 155, 156, and so on. So use that to gauge, and you can be flexible within those couple of centimeters. I personally like a little bit more length in my board because it provides a few benefits, especially in the park on these bigger jumps. A little bit of a longer of a board will make your board more stable and able to handle longer, smoother carves. You sacrifice that by not being able to go and turn as quickly, so you'll see effects on that, like going through some tight tree runs. But it really makes up for it because the ability to go and set down your tail and hold that strong line off the takeoffs just makes you feel way more smooth and in control. So if jumping or just carving the mountain is your main focus, I'd highly recommend going and getting 1 centimeter, 2 centimeter larger than like your bare minimum size. After we know the size, we need to determine what kind of snowboard we're looking for. So I mainly ride park and mainly big jumps. So I'm gonna want the stiffest, fullest camber, baddest board there is. That's why I went with the Nitro Team Pro, because this thing, it's stiff. You can ride any feature of it, any terrain. It's also the most crucial thing for any park board, and I think like any board that you want to take in the park and just get clean lines in the snow, it's something called full camber. Full camber is the greatest design in my opinion because it goes and lets you lock in those edges and really hold a strong, stable carve through the snow that you just don't get with the other shapes of the snowboards. You can play around with it a bit more if you're just looking for a mountain board or a Pow board, especially full camber isn't as big of a deal. But if your main focus is park and lacing smooth turns, full camber is the way to go. So that limits our choices a bit, but all major snowboard companies make full camber. Nitro, the two main boards I've tried, is the Nitro Team Pro, and they also have the Nitro Team Not Pro. The Nitro Team Not Pro Edition is a great board. I actually used it all season last season and loved it. The only thing with it is it's a little bit softer, a little bit less heavy duty. So it will wear out a bit faster if you're riding super big features. But if you're more intermediary, you're not riding every single day, I think the non-pro version would work super well for you because it's a little bit easier to control than the Pro. The Pro is basically just a beefed up version of the normal Team. So that means it's going to be slightly heavier, it has a bit of a faster base, and it's more stiff. So this board will just go and stay good longer and be safe for these big features. Both are really good boards though, full camber, top of the market choices. So now we got our board selected, let's prep it for the slopes. there's two things I think are really important to note when setting up a new snowboard. First of all, there's a big misconception that you gotta file down your edges if you wanna ride rails. I just haven't found this true in my riding. It's more like a mental thing, like, oh, I don't wanna catch with my sharp edges. But you take 4 laps just carving, enjoying your fresh board, and you'll be able to start getting into board slides, no problem. You can also do something with your edges at a shop, what pivots them up onto a different degree. This is a very niche thing, and I think it's a little unnecessary, but if you're really worried about catching your edge, and that's something that's really stuck in your head, it can be worth doing. The only downside about it is it makes it so every time you want to sharpen your edges, you need to take it to a professional board maintenance guy, because the tools they sell don't let you go and sharpen them on the angles that they set your edges to. The next thing that's super important with a new board is people often think that boards come with a super good fresh wax base. This just sadly isn't true. You're gonna wanna wax your new board before taking on the slopes. I wax my board at least once, up to 2 times, and I know some guys who go crazy and will wax their board 4 times, fully scrape it before taking on the slope. That's a little obsessive. I'd do that if I was like doing a contest that I really wanted to do well at, but just normally, just wax your board once, scrape it. If you really want it to last you a long time, give it that second wax, and that'll really let the base soak in all that and stay faster for much longer. Now we're going to talk about the part of setting up the board that gives me the most anxiety and is my least favorite to do. That's determining the width of my stance. There's something I use for this though that really has helped me get my stance. If you go and put your bindings on your board and take your forearm, put it in between the bindings, elbow tight against your back binding, knuckles tight against your front binding, this is a super solid stance. Then I play around with this range. I usually go with like a half knuckle extension, so 1 or 2 centimeters wider. And I even at some points in my snowboarding career have gone half knuckle extension. Some people even go as far out as full finger extension, but that is starting to get borderline too wide of a stance. So I try to keep my stance within any range between here all the way to closed knuckles. I never go tighter than closed knuckles. What happens when you go tighter than the forearm is your knees actually start caving in and your hips will start turning inwards. This is really sick if you're trying to be a rail rat and get those super fast pretzels and let yourself pivot around your hips super nice, but it's gonna do absolutely awful things to keeping your body stacked, strong, and stable, going off jumps or just carving down the slopes. And the same problem also happens when you go and make your stance too wide. If you go past the forearm to fingertip stance, what's gonna happen is your knees are gonna bowie out, and it's gonna make it so you need to use more hip flexors in order to keep your muscles in line and moving. When you go and make your legs turn out like that, it's really bad for that tall body position you want as your baseline for most of your tricks and most of your turns. And it's also really tricky on the knees because then you're doing your squats and putting your force outward sideways instead of having your impact come down straight up and down. So when I'm deciding my stance, I'm trying to pick the stance that lets my knees squat in the most comfortable position possible. What works for me is I go forearm and I go and slightly extend my fingers. So I'm like 1 centimeter further than my forearm. For reference, middle of the binding to middle of the binding, 22 inches. So that's my ideal stance, is 22 inches on the dot. Now that I have that determined, I want to decide where I'm placing my bindings. A new trend for snowboarding is putting a little bit longer nose than the tail. So for example, this Nitro board is 21 inches on the nose, 20 inches on the tail. So that means it's set back a little bit. What's really nice, I like a little bit of a setback, and I'd set it back even further if I want to take this board into powder. But this is my park board, so I'm going to make it as centered as possible within the range of the binding slots. With the EST system, you can make your stance a little more customizable, a little bit more niche and precise, but I really prefer the bolt system because then your bindings just don't slide around as much and you don't need to be constantly tightening them. And you sacrifice a little bit in your range selection, but it's really not a big deal. All right, so I had to play around with my stance a little bit. I couldn't just go straight dead center of the board because it made my stance slightly too long. So what I did is I went the most narrow on the front foot, moved it up 1 bolt slot. So I have a slightly bit more room there, and then I have the back foot as narrow as it can get. So I go measure it in, and that's perfect. I got a 1-finger gap. Well, let me push it out and center this out a little bit more because I want slightly more room than that. Get those bolts nice and centered. Fingers in, pull it out a little bit. Beautiful. 1-finger gap past my forearm. That is my ideal stance. And I'm able to go and move my front binding a little bit forward with no stress because I have that extra inch on the front. So my board still is set back a little bit and still really good to go. Now that we have our stance figured out, it's time to figure out the angles we want to lock in on. There's a few different angles and reasons behind them. The most standard and true angle is 9-12. So -9 on your back foot, +12 on your front foot. This will go and give you a great canvas to open your hips and close your hips and not be too aggressive. I'm riding 6-9, what's a more narrowed in, less duck foot stance. I really like that because it just keeps my body more in line and I don't need that extra bit of opening that I get from the extra 3 degrees on the front foot or 3 degrees on the back foot. I really just like the more straight stance. Another super valid stance is 9-9. Some people even do 12-12. I'm personally not a fan of the duck foot. I just like having that difference in my front foot and my back foot. Just helps me click in and clue in on what I'm doing. Some people even go 15 on their front foot. I wouldn't recommend ever going higher than 12 on either of your feet. And I'd always recommend going and having your back foot 3 degrees less than your front foot. That's just how I do it, and that's how most of the best snowboarders in the world do it. So I'm going to set this up 6-9, but 9-12, 12-12, 9-9 are all valid, and just choose which one works best for you. Here's a couple things I learned through the process of doing my bindings a bunch of times. I've had a lot of trouble with getting the screws in before. So what I did here is I wanted my stance a little bit lighter, so you can see I pushed the screws all the way to the edge. This isn't going to affect the stability or looseness, but it will give me my more ideal stance. Then what I do to make sure I'm not going and destroying my inserts is I tighten 1 screw in the corner just a little bit. Then I go to the other corner and tighten this screw. This will go and make sure that my bindings are in line, so I won't be stuck with like the last screw out of place and with the decision to unscrew all the bindings or just try force it. Then I go and do either corners, it doesn't matter. Still just doing them super light until I get all 4 in. Nice and light. Let's do the last one. Nice. Now that all 4 of my screws are in, I can tighten them without worrying that it's going to displace them and make it so I can't fit the other ones. And I am gonna tighten them. When you have a fresh board and fresh bindings, you want these things to be super tight. The more your screws get loose and start sliding around, the more it's going to wreck your inserts, so your board will start sliding around even more. This is even more true for the EST system. Once your bindings start sliding, it's going to keep sliding easier and easier. So stopping that before it starts is a really great thing to help your bindings and your board's long-term health. I have the Nitro Team binding. This binding has a lot of super nice features, mostly a very foamy bottom plate that will help absorb some of the impact. And it also has a few features you can do to go and tweak it to make it better fit your foot. Mostly the foam can pull forward a little bit. I have small feet, so I'm just going to leave it base, but you can extend it to avoid a little bit of toe hang. And the most important feature when adjusting your bindings is something called the forward lean. Forward lean is the angle of your high back. So base is just straight up, then forward lean leans it forward. What this does is when you're doing heel side turns on your snowboard, you actually use the high back to leverage your turns. Think about putting a screwdriver under something and pulling it up. It makes it so you can lift something with a lot less force. That's the same principles with a forward lean technology. So the more forward lean you have, the more aggressive the leverage will be. So I won't need to lean back as much in order to initiate that heel side carve. That's why we want a little bit of forward lean, but not too much, because we don't want to just slightly lean back and have our board just really digging that edge. We want to still have the control and stability. So I'm going to go slide the thing all the way to the top. But Team Nitros use a really cool system. It's a screw-based system, so it's a little bit more finicky to adjust, but once you get it in place, it's going to be solid. So top notch, I'm going to go down 2 notches. 1, 2. So you can see there, I have the 2 little notches, and that's a perfect amount of forward lean for me. Not too aggressive, but still will give me that added assistance. I'm just gonna go in there, tighten it up a little bit. I'll tighten it up way more once we're not filming, because now that I got it, I'm not gonna change it. I like my forward lean at a nice 2. A couple cool things about this is they actually use wires in the straps, what I've never seen before. This will just make it so you do not need to worry about your straps ever tearing apart. What's really common with some of the other companies. And then one thing you also want to consider when setting up a new board, and especially if you have new boots, is the straps will loosen a little bit over time. So right now they'll be the tightest as possible. So especially if you have a new boot with all of your fresh foam in it, it's going to be really restricting on the binding. So if I go to put it in, it's going to be a lot tighter to fit, and I won't be able to get as much tight flexibility. Hard to do when not strapped in, not too practiced at it. But you can see here, it doesn't give me too many flexibility options here without it really indenting into a boot. So what I like to do when I have new boots is I adjust the back heel strap here. Just make it a little bit looser. This way I have more options and more flexibility range for putting up my binding, and it will give a better fit to my new boot. This you only need to do for like the first few days, and you'll constantly want to keep tightening this and keeping it so you can fully utilize the range. Because if you have your little stump too short, then you're only going to have a few notches to play with. So you'll either have too loose or too tight. So what you want to do is have it go down around to the middle here. This will make it so I'm not going and wrenching on it, destroying my ladders, but it still gives me that extra range of flexibility. So when you're breaking in the new boots, make the sucker a little bit longer so you have more flexibility, and then as you break in the boots and the bindings, you can keep tightening it up so you can keep your bad boy nice and long and keep your mobility options. Paranoid about your stance like I am, a trick I like to do to really reassure that I have my board set to the right stance for me is I close my eyes and I just try to feel around what I think my natural snowboard stance is. I get it in a position and then I go and test with the elbow trick. So there I see elbows super tight. That's the exact stance I have on my snowboard, give or take 1 centimeter, but I just know that feels natural because that's the natural position my body went to with the eyes closed. So natural position, if that's right and it's lined up on your board, it's going to be perfect for you, and your knees are going to be thanking you for doing this precision later in the season. Before taking my board to the slopes, I like to strap in and make sure everything's right. So my stance, my straps, just so I don't pull up to the mountain and need to go and do a little bit of maintenance. So got the strap extended, that feels great. Let's see about the toe. Toe is good as well. Maybe I'll extend that a little bit, but it's good right now. Let's do the back foot. This one I didn't preemptively adjust, so it's going to be a little bit tight, but not bad. It'll do for the ground play. When I go feel my stance, I like to look at where my knees bend down. So this stance feels good because my knees are going down in a straight line. I test how easy it is to open my hips. Angles feel good, close the hips, angles feel good. Then I also like feeling this flex a little bit because these new boards are so like so much stiffer than what you normally ride. So it's good to just get a little bit of a flex feel. I can already tell this board's way stiffer than the non-pro. This is so nice. Nose press. Oh yeah. Feel the edges. Make sure my toes aren't hanging off the front too much. I have a little bit of hang there. Maybe I'll go and extend my base plate out a little bit. Let's see the heel hang. Heel hang's good. That won't be an issue. And yeah, stance feels perfect. Let's go and do the forearm trick real quick. Oh, that's a little hard to flex down. No, stance is good. Board set up, and we're ready to shred. This is gonna be awesome. Now all we have to do is wait for snow to come. A powder board isn't too much different than setting up a park board. The biggest difference is the actual shape of the board. So this is the Nitro mountain Pow board, and it has a slightly different camber. It's closer to a true camber. And the most significant difference is it has so much more length in the nose. 23 inches in the nose compared to 18 inches on the tail. So a whole 5 inches difference from nose to tail, what is absolutely essential when you have a powder board. You can set up any board to ride powder and be more efficient, but you want to set it back. But here, that's already done for us, so we can just go to the reference stance and we'll have plenty of extra length on the nose. Then I only make a couple different changes for setting up my powder board versus my park board. First of all, I size up. I'm riding a 159 park board. I'm going to size up to a 160 powder board. Not a big difference, but that little bit of extra length will just help you charge through the snow and give you a bit more room to keep that nose up. The last thing I do, and this is completely personal preference, I extend my stance just a little bit. So on my normal park board stance, I'm going 22 inches, so closest stance, and then one away from closest on the front foot. For my powder board, I'm just gonna set that one notch down, so that's like 1 centimeter wider. Not a significant difference, I just like that little bit of extra stability it gives me in the powder, having that slightly wider stance. And other than that, you just go, set it up like you would set your park board, wax it the same, don't even think about touching these edges, they're perfect, and you're ready to shred. That is everything I go through when setting up my snowboards and deciding what snowboard to ride for the year. I hope you learned something from it, and I hope you're able to pick a board that will really maximize your riding this coming season.